What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Video Creator Show, where we talk about how to make it on YouTube and just online business in general. So today, we're actually going to be talking about why we think that everybody should, or maybe some people should not, start a video podcast, just like the one you might be watching or listening to right now. This is a video. You can watch it on YouTube or on other social media platforms, as well as shorts and reels and all the good things that you know about. And so that's what we're talking about today. And today's episode is sponsored by vidchops.com, that allows you to take the burden of editing totally off your hands. So if you want to add an expert video editor to your team in just a few clicks, head over to vidchops.com. With all that said, let's go ahead and get right into today's episode. All right, video podcast. I've actually been waiting to do this one a while, Grant. So, have you ever had a video podcast besides this one?
Briefly. So my channel, Treesicle, we released like 2 episodes. They actually did pretty well, but we released them on our main channel, which is not what you should do. We can talk about this. Besides that, not really. This has been the kind of maiden voyage, and it's been a blast, honestly. This is going to be a very meta episode. I'm excited. A video podcast about video podcasts. So here we go.
Yeah, it's cool to be able to do this, and I'm actually a huge advocate of video podcasts, and I'm going to go ahead and start talking about that right now. But also, there are some reasons maybe that you want to stay away from them. So we'll cover all that too, and we'll even talk about at the end how you can get started today, starting your own video podcast. So stick around for the whole episode. This is going to be a good one. I'm excited. So the first reason that I want to bring up that people should start a video podcast is that it seems like YouTube is kind of heading in that direction. You're starting to see a tab on YouTube for podcasts, for video podcasts. And me personally, I would not be surprised that if someday YouTube even goes into audio only podcasts and they start to compete with, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all these big names. And I think they offer hosting for your podcast. And I think they also, are an app on your phone called YouTube Podcasts where you can listen to podcasts. What do you think about that? What do you see in the YouTube world when it comes to podcasts? You agree or disagree with what I just said?
Overall, I agree. I think YouTube likes podcasts they're probably generally less of an issue than random people talking to a camera for a 3-minute video. They tend to be less creepy, so I think YouTube likes that for advertising purposes. In general, YouTube, they did introduce the podcast tab somewhat recently, and I do think the platform is incorporating them. This seems to be kind of the next stage of YouTube. Honestly, it almost seems like they were a little late to the punch here. I mean, Joe Rogan got huge on YouTube years ago, and he was obviously huge elsewhere already, but I'm kind of surprised it took them this long. And I agree. It's kind of a new chapter, a new section of YouTube that is worth going into for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And, another reason is I feel like video podcasts are pretty easy to do. When it comes to creating a 60-minute YouTube video versus a 60-minute video podcast, it's night and day. You can sit down, have a conversation like we're doing right now, kind of riff, off top of the head, have an outline and create some pretty good content. When it comes to a YouTube video, it just seems like it's so much more challenging. So if you're looking for a way to create content, and let's say you've been trying to create YouTube content, but you just can't seem to get in front of the camera, you just can't seem to like any content you're creating or whatever, something's stopping you, maybe you should, change tracks and head towards a video podcast. Grant and I, we don't spend 20 hours planning and scripting these podcasts. We spend 1 hour or 30 minutes coming up with an outline, a topic, and then we just share our thoughts. Would you agree that podcasts are easier, Grant?
Yeah, they are easier. And I think the harder part is growing one, right? So producing a 60-minute video with a video podcast is obviously much easier than pretty much any other kind of YouTube video. However, I think what keeps people from starting is they're worried about getting noticed. Because it is harder to grow a podcast than any other kind of YouTube channel, generally speaking, because I think there is more competition and it is easier to produce. However, the main way, the best, most important way to get noticed is to develop your voice with these episodes. And I think that is such good practice. It ends up feeding into your videos themselves if you're on camera. You can, like, you just get better as you record more, and it's not that much work. And, you know, paying a podcast editor is a lot cheaper than paying, you know, a normal editor because they're just easier to make. So yeah, just in general, I do think they're easier to make.
Yeah, totally. And to me, they're less stressful. I don't know. To me, they're more fun. Like when I sit down to record a podcast like we're doing right now, like it's more enjoyable. For some reason, I feel this stress when I record a YouTube video. I don't know what it is.
It's not as natural. It's like we're just talking here. You know, I can interrupt you a little bit and then you get it back into it. Whereas if you're talking to a camera, you're like, oh, what was I supposed to say? And then you sit there for like 10 seconds while you look at the script, and which is fine. It's just like there is an artificiality to that I think can get a little old. Whereas here it's like, all right, it's Tuesday at 1 p.m. Let's talk, Augie. And we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think besides them being easy and YouTube starting to kind of favor podcasts, also there's like a huge networking opportunity when it comes to having a podcast. First of all, you can reach out and have guests on your podcast, which allows you to meet them, network with them, and help your podcast grow. Because let's just say you have a guest on your show, episode goes great, it comes out, you ask them to share it, they do, they share it with their audience. Then that is like doing a collab, basically, right? Like you could do a collab every single episode with minimal effort, and it could help promote it. So
Yeah.
there's that. That's a big one. And then also, as far as networking and stuff goes, you can be a guest on other podcasts. So not only is that good for promotion, right? Because you can talk about your business if you also have a business or whatever you're selling or whatever you want to promote, and get in front of their audience. But also, if you know anything about search engine optimization, that's where you want to get your website ranked on Google. Being on other podcasts allows you to get backlinks, right? Just links that are linking to your website, which will help your search engine rankings on Google. So podcasts are great. Being a guest on a podcast, having guests on your podcast, great networking opportunities, and almost, you know, depending on what industry you're in, that alone, I think, can make having one worth it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I would even argue, like, yes, having guests and having them able to promote your podcast is potentially another revenue stream. It's another way for people to notice you. All of that is great. There's also an intangible value to talking to other people and having a kind of official time and space to do that in. So even with this podcast, I've talked to hundreds or probably around 100 people at this point. And they're successful YouTubers, and just being able to talk to them for like an hour, I've learned so much about how to grow a YouTube channel. And this is, you know, coming from somebody who ran a couple of big YouTube channels for 7 years. Like, I already knew a lot. And I learned so much more by talking to all these people in different niches and different areas of YouTube. I just feel like there's a lot of, like, when you're kind of in your own bubble and just making videos for yourself, that's great. But I think you can end up kind of limiting yourself because you aren't aware of what's going on in other niches or how other people do things. And it's so easy to like, yeah, I'll reach out to them tomorrow. But when you have a podcast and you need to generate episodes for it, it becomes a reason to reach out to people and to sit down with them and talk to them. And I think you'll find like people are cool. You learn a lot. And there's a kind of comforting and informational value that comes from recording these episodes.
Yeah, that's a good point. The education part is huge. You get to learn from experts a lot of times. I mean, One of my favorite podcasts is called Mixergy. It's a business podcast where they talk about pretty much tech companies, online businesses, marketing, that kind of stuff. And I've been listening to it for years. Andrew Warner is the host. And boy, that guy has done thousands at this point of interviews. He knows a lot. Like he's smart. And it's because he's been getting educated by experts for 10 plus years on these podcasts. And yeah, you're right. There's so much more to it than just networking. It's educational. So that's cool. The next thing I want to bring up is audio. So not only are you going to be able to produce, video content off this for YouTube and other social media platforms, we'll talk more about that in a second, but you're also creating these audio podcasts. You take the video, you take the audio off of it, you publish it on Apple Podcasts, on iTunes, all those different places, Spotify, like we mentioned early. And now you have like a whole nother way for people to find you. And to me, the best way to kind of build that, parasocial relationship, that relationship with your audience to where they feel like they know you, is through an audio podcast, believe it or not. The truth is, for me at least, it's really hard for me to sit down and watch a 60-minute video podcast on YouTube. But for whatever reason, I get through a 60-minute audio podcast like every day. Like I probably listen to one or two every day because I put them on in the background or I put them on in my headphones when I'm running or exercising or working or whatever. And it's a great way to like really soak in knowledge and build that relationship with whoever, that parasocial relationship with whoever is the podcast host. So, with creating YouTube videos and TikTok content, you're not able to take that and turn that into an audio podcast. I mean, you can argue that you could, but it's not the same as a true conversational piece that has value. Any thoughts on that whole side of the video podcast process?
Yeah, there's no better way for your audience to feel like they know you well, like you said. You can do live streams, which is a podcast of sorts.
Yeah.
But I think that there's kind of an added layer of pressure, right? You're showing up live and not everybody can tune in at a certain time. Whereas if you have episodes that you can access or your audience can access at any time, and they hear you talking for, an hour on end, they get to know you so much better. So what ends up happening with podcasts is, kind of like we talked about, they are hard to grow. But when somebody becomes a fan of a podcast and they like hearing you talk for long periods of time, they do get to know you and they do develop a deeper connection with you than if they're just watching your normal videos. And this does create diehard fans. Even if your podcast is relatively small, I think what you'll find is you'll end up with a section of your fan base that like they just know you so well, they love you, and they are so much more diehard than the people who only watch your regular videos. And it's important to have both, but especially when it comes to like monetizing it's important to have fans that feel like they know you on some level. And I don't mean that in a kind of greedy kind of way or like, you could get their money. Just like you need kind of diehard fans and a way to connect with them in order to build an audience. It's said that in order to successfully monetize a YouTube channel, all you really need is 1,000 diehard fans. And that's true. These people will buy your merchandise. They will, they trust you on a deeper level than kind of your more fair weather fans. And it's important to, respect them and, all that important human stuff. But from a business standpoint, it is also really important to kind of have that section of your audience. Hey there. You probably know the Video Creator Show is brought to you by vidchops.com. What is vidchops.com? Well, it is an editing service that will take the horrible burden of editing off your back. We all know video editing. It's tedious. It takes forever. But what if you had a professional who did it for you? You go to sleep, you wake up, it's done. Wouldn't that be magical? vidchops.com. Hire a professional, save yourself time and energy, and take your YouTube channel to the next level.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you might be listening to this right now thinking, okay, great. I create YouTube content. I hear what they're saying. I think I'm going to start an audio podcast as well. But I would say, wait, stop, hold up. You probably want to make sure it's a video podcast that can also be an audio podcast. And
Hmm.
I'll go ahead and
Right.
talk about a few reasons right now. Number one is shorts. Okay. Imagine recording a 60-minute audio podcast. And we've just started doing that recently with this podcast. I can maybe share some numbers in a little bit, but you can take that, you can turn it into vertical videos and add captions and throw them up on TikTok and Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. I don't know if I'm missing any. Those are kind of the main three right there for
Hmm.
vertical. And repurpose this content to kind of just get more views, get more bang for your buck from creating the content. You also, what is a common thing is you can take these 60-minute episodes and cut them into maybe 2 or 3 10-minute segments where you just edit it up. It's a 10-minute video. Now you can put it out and it can be a standalone YouTube video. And those seem to do well because, that's a standard length for a YouTube video. And as long as you're talking about stuff that keeps people's attention and keeps them watching, that's great. I mean, that's the Joe Rogan system, right? Joe Rogan does not post any full episodes on YouTube. They're all just clips. And I'm not sure if he still does. Does he, Grant? Does he still post clips? I know he's signed with Spotify now. So.
Yeah, so what happened was he initially, before he signed with Spotify, he had his main channel where he just posted long episodes and maybe occasional clips. And then he had a clip channel where he only posted clips. Then when he signed to Spotify, now he posts clips to only his main channel. I don't think he uses his clip channel at all right now, that I believe.
Yeah, and that's a strategy that Logan Paul copied with his podcast Impulsive. And I think people saw the Joe Rogan success, and then they saw basically Impulsive, I think, is a pretty close copy. I think Logan Paul is getting inspiration for sure from Joe Rogan and kind of their system. And they have a clips channel that's doing well. And and since then, tons have popped up. Like it's kind of a new trend now. I feel like every YouTuber now has a YouTube channel and then also a video podcast. And when we're talking about clips and shorts, these are different things. Clips are a 10-minute horizontal wide video for YouTube, and shorts would be the vertical 9:16 with captions that you are less than 60 seconds. And then you also have your long form video, right? Your 60-minute video. So Grant, in your opinion, what is the best strategy to use these 3 different types of videos that you could generate just from, one video podcast?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand the benefits, like the pros and cons of each of those. So there's the full episodes, the clips, and then the shorts, right? So the full episodes are essentially going to be watched by your most diehard fans. Your clips are going to be watched by a sort of kind of intermediate, we'll call them like fair weather fans, perhaps. And then shorts are going to be watched by more casual fans. And obviously, there's going to be overlap between these categories. But generally speaking, shorts go viral much more easily, but the attention they generate tends to be kind of ephemeral. It doesn't necessarily lead to something. As far as how to utilize those kind of 3 layers of your audience, with shorts, especially with a podcast, you always want to post or pin rather the link to the full episode in the comments. Like I can't tell you how crazy it makes me when I see like a short of a podcast that was really amusing and fun, and then I try to find the full episode and they just don't say where to find this or what it's called, or it's just like, it's bad for the viewer, it's bad for your podcast. It just never do it. You should always pin the full episode in the comment of your short. And likewise, if you post a clip of your podcast, you should always link the full episode in the description. Always, always, always never forget, it's unacceptable to not do it. In fact, I feel like usually when this happens, it's like a channel that just re-uploads other people's podcasts and they don't actually own any of this stuff, so they don't really care if they're just sort of a parasite living off of other people's content.
Yeah,
So
no,
yes, that is the way to do it.
yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like a little ecosystem linking to each other, promoting, because the truth is like the long form videos, and now we're kind of switching subjects here, getting into why maybe people should not create a
Hmm.
video podcast is they're not great for the algorithm, right? You mentioned it earlier that you had created, two podcast episodes that were 60 minutes long and you posted them on your main channel and you said you shouldn't have done that. Maybe you should speak a little bit on why you said that you shouldn't have done that in
Hmm.
regards to the algorithm.
Right. So the main reason is because your so at least in this case, I'm just going to use the Treesicle as kind of an example here. So with Treesicle, our main style of video that got the channel as big as it got, this was highly edited, scripted content, and a podcast is not edited, it's not scripted, and it's much longer than most of our videos were. So you're kind of like mixing very different styles of content on a channel, which is never good. You always want your channel to be as narrow as possible because that's going to attract the highest percentage of your audience every time. So, if you're releasing one style of content that is super different than another, you kind of end up fragmenting your audience where only like a fraction of them is going to tune in every time. And that's going to make YouTube think that your subscribers are not very engaged with what you're posting. It's just going to lower the percentage of people that show up every time. So you should always have a separate channel for a podcast. The only exception to this is occasionally, I think it can be valuable to post a really good clip of your podcast on your main channel, but only if it's really good. And I would only do it maybe a couple times a month. It depends how often you release, right? If you're releasing once a month on your main channel, then I would basically, I don't know, maybe like twice a year post a clip. But yeah, just don't inundate your main channel with a podcast. That's really important to know.
And I think that also, like, if your podcast can look like a typical YouTube video that's on your channel, if you can edit it that way, then you're okay. Then you're kind of fine. Because I can think of some podcasts that record in person, right? Like in a studio, and there's two people sitting there, and then they edit them in a way with multicam where it actually looks like a typical YouTube video that's on their channel already. It doesn't really look like they're changing styles. I think that's an okay way. That might be an exception, but yeah, I mean, to just drop a 60-minute video, it's going to kill your average view duration, or average percentage viewed, right? I mean, it's going to be a 60-minute, you might get, I don't know what it would be, but it's going to be like 5%, 2% compared to, all your other videos getting 40% and all those high numbers. So there's that. I mean, it's not just the YouTube algorithm is not going to just push out a bunch, at least from what I see, like a bunch of 60-minute podcasts to the masses. Now, if there's a person that's always watching different 60-minute podcasts and that's all they really watch on YouTube, then yeah, they'll serve them those. But they're not going to, for a typical YouTube viewer, all of a sudden start sharing these 60-minute ones to them if they never watch them because they just don't watch 60-minute videos. It's just not common on YouTube. So that's the first thing. That's kind of the challenging part of having a video podcast is you put up all these episodes, you're thinking that they're going to take off on YouTube, and you might need to look at your strategy and say, okay, should I be doing clips? Should I be doing shorts as well? And should I be linking them all together, like you mentioned early? The other reason I would say that is a challenge when it comes to being a podcaster, and this is completely on the audio side, is that there really isn't like a way to get discovered. Like with the YouTube homepage, right? YouTube is promoting new creators all the time to people who they think would be interested in that kind of content. I don't think there's an algorithm or a discovery platform out there that really promotes them. I mean, if I was to open up the Apple Podcast app on my iPhone, and yeah, I mean, I don't even think I could look at it right now. I don't even think there is like a homepage that's going to promote ones out to me. Let me just bring it up. It's just listen now. And then those are the ones I'm subscribed to. And then underneath that, there's you might like, which I've never even really looked at. But I do scroll through there a little bit right now, and I'm seeing, okay, yeah, there are some recommendations there, but I mean, I'm gonna get shown maybe 7. If I swipe a couple times, I might see 7 when, YouTube on the homepage is just flooded. What are some thoughts, man, about this? Like, how do we solve this, or why is it so hard to get discovered?
I think there's just so many. Like you said with the app there, like they're gonna promote you a few, but I think ultimately these podcast apps and even YouTube, like there's an understanding that there's a lot of competition, and you should essentially be patient with a podcast. You're not going to grow it overnight. Like I think starting a YouTube channel, I've interviewed plenty of people on this podcast where their channel's only a year old and they have like 100,000 subscribers. That can still happen.
Yeah.
But with a podcast, if you don't have any pre-existing audience or fame, you have to be patient. And if you aren't patient and your goal is to explode as quickly as possible, you're going to be frustrated and you're going to feel like you're wasting your time. You should really only podcast if you're looking to learn and you kind of understand the long-term value of it. I would essentially not expect anything from your podcast relative to your YouTube channel for at least a couple years. You're not gonna. It's so hard to get discovered, and that is so important to be aware of. It's very rare that a podcast explodes immediately.
Yeah, and that's why you do want to go and be a guest on other shows to promote it.
Yes.
You do want to, I don't know, have just be creating content in other ways and give yourself a chance to promote your podcast in other places. That's kind of the name of the game. And then, like we said, having guests on that will share it out is also effective. Okay, let's kind of transition one more time and talk about starting a video podcast, because this is one thing that's been driving me crazy lately, and I've actually been a victim of this as well. And we'll talk about that at the end as far as recording software, best practices, and that. But step number 1 is to kind of decide: is your podcast going to be in person, where you have guests on that are in your presence, or virtual, like the one we're doing right now? I think they both have their pros and cons. What are your thoughts on whether you should start an in-person or a virtual one?
So the first thing is it depends how much money you have, right? Because an in-person one, you need a studio, whether that's just kind of an extra room in your house or whatever. You're going to need more space. Also, if you are going to have guests and your podcast is based around guests, then you have to figure out, okay, how do you fly these people in? Like, do you pay for their hotel? Do you hope that they'll be down to do that? That's going to limit, that's either going to cost you a lot of money, or it's going to limit the number of people who come on your podcast. And honestly, it would probably be both. But obviously the pro is when you have something in person, I think 1, you can kind of design a cool set and just have it. 2, I think in-person conversations are always a little more smooth. Like the chemistry is just going to be a little bit better. You're not dealing with lag time. You can kind of see people's facial expressions as they're happening. It's just, it's the oldest way to communicate, right? So it's essentially your chemistry is going to be a little better. You could argue the overall aesthetic is going to be a little better, but it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be less practical, and you just kind of have to choose. And then virtual with guests. I mean, I just send them a link to Riverside here. We record with Riverside Studio. They hop in, and a couple days ago, I talked to a guy who lives in Scotland, and it was easy. It was like we lived in the same area code. That's the magic of virtual podcasts.
Yeah, and I think virtual is, if you're nervous, it's the easier way,
Yes.
and definitely way that like you can make it happen. Like a lot of people have these big ideas. Oh, I'm gonna turn my garage into a studio or blah blah blah. Like that's all well, but like it's not going to happen, right? Like you're not going to actually be able to get these people into your studio to record unless you have just not guests, but just one other person. right? That's a buddy that lives down the street or somewhere in town and they can
Yes.
come over. Then I think that would, if that was the case, like Grant and I do not live near each other. If we lived, in the same town, then we might record these in person, right? But we don't. And so we're able to make it happen virtually. And you mentioned something there. You mentioned Riverside.fm, the app that we use to record. And this is the part that I said is starting to drive me crazy is, just the other day I was a guest on a podcast and they actually have a content studio. So they have this building that they rent out. They have cameras set up. And I was impressed. I was like, this is great. You guys are doing it right. You guys got these couches, these great mics. You got 3 people running around in the back, setting up the background and working the cameras, camera 1, camera 2. I'm like, this is pro. And then I go to find out, all right, we're getting ready to record here. We're going to use Zoom. Now, most people are recording their podcasts on Zoom. And these people didn't even know. And the problem with that, and I had an old podcast back in the day that I also recorded on Zoom until I learned better. And this technology is a little bit new. I would say it's probably 2 to 3 years old, but Zoom will lower the quality of your audio. It'll lower the quality of your video. And so although these people had the best mics, the best setup, the best cameras, the footage and the audio, it just wasn't as good as it could be. Riverside, and there's other ones too out there. I'm not sure.
There's like StreamYard.
StreamYard is a great one. Squadcast, I think, is another one. But what they do is they record your video and your audio locally on your computer while you're recording, and then while that's happening, it's uploading it into the cloud somewhere, like onto essentially like a Dropbox or Google Drive almost. So it's the native audio, the native video, the audio that's coming right through my mic, the video that's coming right from my camera, which is, you could even record in 4K and your audio is whatever. So that's a huge thing. If you're thinking about starting, one, you want to look at StreamYard and Riverside and these other apps to make sure that you're recording in the highest quality, and there's that. So the next thing I want to talk about is mics, cameras, and then we've got a few other things on how to start a podcast. So what's kind of your advice on mics and cameras?
I mean, the biggest thing is spend more money on a microphone than a camera. Maybe not literally more money, but because microphones tend, like the most expensive microphone is going to be way cheaper than the most expensive camera. That is just a fact. You can spend, probably $100,000 on a camera setup if you really wanted to. I mean, that would be insane, but you could do it. A microphone, the most expensive microphone is probably, it might be like a couple grand. But even then, like a $400 microphone is plenty. And that's still better than you need. You can get a Blue Yeti for like $100 and it sounds fine. Like it'll sound pretty good. That is going to be plenty good enough. So yeah, generally speaking, audio quality, even with a video podcast, is going to be more important than video quality. You don't want bad video quality, but if people's voices are garbled or they just sound bad, that is just not going to be okay, especially for a podcast. And even, I mean, even in movies, the saying goes, a movie is 2/3 audio, 1/3 video. The audio is actually the most important thing of basically any type of video.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like you said, microphones, $100. Webcam, probably $100 to $200. I'm using a mirrorless camera, and that's another option that you can do if you want your video to look like a YouTube video, right, with maybe the blurry background or whatever. I mean, this is the exact same camera that I use to shoot my YouTube videos. It can get down to 1.2 aperture, which is what gives you that blurry background. Then there's ways to use that. You can use a DSLR, and what I'm using is the Canon M6 Mark II. I have it connected to my computer through something called the Cam Link, which is pretty expensive. It's just a little plug-in thing, but it's $100. And it plugs in through USB. And now I'm able to use this camera with a great lens. Okay, I got like a $600 Sigma lens on here to record as your webcam. And not only can you use it for podcasts, but I could, do a Zoom meeting, or I could do any kind of meeting, and I could use it as a webcam. So there's that. And that's a little bit more advanced, right? You have to know how to use a mirrorless camera and get it to focus and lighting and all that kind of stuff. But you also can get a really good webcam, and you can just plop a little webcam that shoots in 1080p, and there you go. You got a video podcast with solid quality. Most 90% of the people wouldn't be able to notice. And the cool thing with Riverside, and I'm sure these other apps too, is that you can literally download the mobile app on my phone. And we've even recorded a few episodes with where I did use my phone as my camera. And phone cameras nowadays are awesome, so you can get by doing that. Any other thoughts on the mic or camera, Grant?
Yeah, just I guess I could vent about webcams for a second. I feel like I've looked into webcams a lot, and webcams suck, or they're like $300 and still not amazing. So yeah, if you have room for like a cam link and to mount like a real camera, that's going to look the best. I do find like, even really, I'll look at like a webcam review for a $300 camera, and I'm like, that looks a bit better than my current webcam that I bought 5 years ago for $90. It's like, okay, I don't know. Like, is this going to be better? So basically, if you're looking into webcams and you're like, why is this so hard? You're not alone.
Yeah. And I would recommend, if you're going to go full speed at this, like, if you don't have a DSLR mirrorless that can do this, then okay, you're talking about a pretty penny. Like, you're looking in, $800, $1,000. So maybe that's not the best way. But if you already do have one, I would say, hey, look into getting that cam link and get it set up, because, you're going to repurpose this content, right? And you want it to look good. And I mean, people won't be able to tell that it's a video podcast at times. They'll think, oh, look, it's just a YouTube video. It's got great quality. And for me personally, like I like to be able to plug in my cam link and record through Riverside when I'm even recording like a YouTube video sometimes, because you just have better controls. Like, I can pause it, I can pause my recording on my computer. I can stop it, start it. I'm not having to like reach behind the camera or jump up and go and press it or whatever. So I don't know. I think it's pretty useful. But there you go. There's cameras and mics. The last things we need to talk about is hosting. So with an audio podcast, you actually have to pay for audio hosting, and it's not expensive. It's like $7 a month to maybe $20 a month, and then that's where you upload your audio to. So you upload it there, and then it syndicates it out to all of the apps. Like, there's so many podcast apps, Stitcher, all the ones we've named. I don't know. There's even more. There's a lot. But it's
Podbean.
Yeah, Podbean, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it'll syndicate it to all those. So you don't have to upload it, 40 times or whatever. You just do it once. The hosting that we use is called Buzzsprout. Another popular one's called Libsyn. And so you're going to need that. And then the last thing is, you're going to want to edit your podcast. You're going to want to improve the audio, do maybe volume matching, where, even Grant and I, our volume levels are different. And so in the editing process, we just level those out, make them even, remove a lot of the mistakes, the ums and all that kind of stuff. And editing audio is a little bit different than video. So there might be a little bit of a learning curve there. And not to mention that the video podcast typically doesn't need that much editing. I mean, you can edit it as much as you want, but from what I think you should do is just, remove all the mistakes and just kind of let it flow. So there's not much editing there. But then there's more editing when it comes to repurposing and to clips and to vertical short form video. And then also you have to edit, like I said, the audio on top. So that's basically it. Grant, anything you want to add there, or anything about any podcast best practices when it comes to starting a podcast?
Yeah, I did want to touch on editing. So In general, I would say less editing is better for a podcast. There's some exceptions to this. You can script a podcast, and if that's what you're called to do, then definitely do it. But when it's a conversational podcast, I would argue the only thing you should edit out is, if there's like a 3-minute section where you're having a technical difficulty or something, you can kind of just like cut that out. But uhs or kind of brief natural pauses that happen, I would just leave it. It's not worth the time. And I think too many jump cuts over the course of like a long conversation actually gets kind of tiring. Like there was a podcast, Logan Paul was on somebody's podcast, and the way it was edited, like because it was cutting between multiple camera angles, you couldn't really, it wasn't obvious this was happening, but I'm pretty sure they cut out all of the pauses between them talking, right? So like if you're having a normal conversation, I ask you a question, you're going to pause for like half a second before answering it. Usually that's just sort of how it works. There was no time at all between any sentences. They were just like cut, cut for an hour. And I had to turn it off, even though I liked the conversation. It was too much for me. And maybe I'm just a boomer, but doing that for an hour, it's more work, it's more expensive, and I just think it's worse. So don't over edit your podcast. Like simple is good with a podcast. That I'm going to leave that idea with that. It's so important.
I agree. I would say the only part I disagree with is in the audio side. I think, for our podcast, we do remove but for some reason, because you don't have that visual cut, you don't notice. You know what I mean? And so,
right. Sure.
Yeah. So like when you're editing and jump cutting a video, you're going to notice it and it's going to just kind of ruin it. When it's audio, you can edit it in a way where you don't notice it, and you can still leave in the pauses and stuff. It's not like you're just going to cut every dead space, but you can remove ums and just times where you repeat yourself and stuff like that. And it just sounds pretty smooth. But yeah. So there it is. I want to kind of summarize, you guys. Here's why you should start a video podcast. Number one, YouTube's headed in that direction. Okay, there's already got the tab. I can see the algorithm starting to kind of figure out probably how to incorporate 60-minute and how to promote a 60-minute podcast and how to make those go viral, just like a typical YouTube video. The other reason is it's easy. You don't need to script out 10 minutes of content. You can have a short outline, hit record, and kind of riff and talk. It's also a great way to network. You can have guests on. You can be guests on other podcasts. And the last thing is that you can repurpose a podcast, and it's such a great strategy that so many people are using nowadays. It's like the Andrew Tate method, right? Where you record one podcast, you create a bunch of shorts, maybe 10 shorts off that podcast. You also create clips, and then you have the long form as well. You can syndicate that over all your other platforms, all your social media, and get views, right? Like the shorts for this podcast on a YouTube channel that has 30 subscribers. We have some shorts on here that have 2,000 views, which, like we mentioned earlier, a short view is not worth as much as a 60-minute podcast audio listen, right? That's probably more valuable. And someone watching a 10-minute YouTube video is probably more valuable, but, it will all lead back to people watching those 10-minute videos and subscribing to your podcast if you do it right. So, Grant, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Just that, editing out uhs and ums, the fact that we do that for the audio and I didn't even notice, clearly that is worth it. So, you can edit. Like basically, if you're going to put a lot of editing into your podcast, I think it does tend to be better with audio versus video. Just all the jump cuts and whatnot. So it's just something to keep in mind. You can basically release kind of two slightly different versions of your podcast, and that's going to help you grow kind of independently on each platform.
Yeah, it's well said. And if you're editing your own stuff, then it's your choice. It's not, you leave those ums in. That is not going to hurt you in any way. We have somebody that does it for us, so it's a little bit, I guess our expectations are a little bit higher. So that's that. So, all right. Well, I think that covers it today. Hopefully, if you don't have a video podcast, reach out to us. We can help you out, especially over at vidchops.com. If you want us to edit up your video podcast, we can help you with that. But really, if you just want help, leave a comment on this video and say, hey, I'm interested. Where should I start? And I can send you a resource or whatever. And that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.
Later.